That's all okay. Yeah, as you can see, a note that we'll be live streaming. I'll tell you a bit more about that, and we're recording as well the session. So welcome everyone, really excited that you are joining us today and you'll hear about our exciting guest speakers. And I know you're all here to hear more about how does exposure to RapiD, which is one of the editors used in Tasking Manager, affect volunteer productivity. So we usually run, the Tasking Manager meetup. So today we're having this special edition, and you can see already on camera our guest speaker, and they're researchers from the University of Colorado Boulder and Indiana University Bloomington, and you'll hear quite a bit from them today. So if we move on to the next slide, just a few house rules for today. So as I just mentioned, with different community webinars that we run, this will be live streamed on YouTube and will be recorded as well. So those who weren't able to join today will be able to watch the recording as well. And just a reminder about the hot code of conduct, to be welcoming and respectful in this space, how you phrase your words when you speak, you'll have a chance to hear from you. And really to try and be understanding of each other if there is a disagreement as well. Over to the next slide, just a bit about the structure of today's session. So we have 1 hour with additional 30 minutes for additional discussion, but we just want to be aware of your time. So we plan for 1 hour. We'll start with a brief intro and an icebreaker that I'll facilitate. And then you hear the presentation of the findings from the research team. And then we have plenty of time for discussion, and we'll share a survey that it was in the meeting invite, but we'll share that again with you. And some, people who are on social media, you can use those hashtags. So plenty of time for discussion after the presentation. You'll be able to raise your hand, or also, as the presentation is happening, if there are any questions in the chat, I'll make sure I keep an eye on that. And I should have started with my name, even though it's written on Zoom, but my name is Petya, and I work for HOT as a facilitator working on tech engagement specifically. So I'll be facilitating this session and excited to hear from you. So moving over to the next slide is our icebreaker. So let me share my screen now. Just give me a second. And we'll go to a platform called Menti, which a few of you are quite familiar with, so just give me a second on this, and I'll share just to see, for us to find out who is in the audience, but also, we've done some of those fun questions before. So if you've never heard of Menti before, you can scan the code on your phone, or you can go to menti.com and enter the code. Maybe I'll ask Letitia if you can just type that again in the chat for anyone who is trying to type this. They can just copy and paste, and I'll give it a few seconds for people to join. I can see already 8 people. I'll wait a bit more for more people to join. And it will take us 2-3 minutes just very briefly to see, hopefully excite you. And, if it's your morning or if it's your evening, you have a chance to get excited. And okay, a few seconds, 50, so we have half of the group joining us. Great. All right. Let's go to the first question, which all of you have seen, I'm sure, quite a few times. But if you haven't, and you already typed in the chat, where you're joining us from, but we wanted to see, where do you feel most at home? I know a lot of people maybe live in different locations around the world. So, oh, yay. I'm loving all the content. Wonderful. So we have Australia missing. Great. But I think that's the beauty of, these sessions and all of you joining us from so many different locations. So thank you for being here, whether it's early morning or late afternoon for you or midday. Thank you for joining us. Great. Oh, I'm loving this map. Okay, so this one is emojis. I'm sure we've done it, but you can describe what your mood is today. Maybe you're sleepy, maybe you're excited. You can add an emoji, you can type it. I know if it's in your laptop, just because we like emojis. So we thought, why not add those? Great. Yeah. Cozy. Oh, great. Sometimes I ask people, what drink do you have? For me, it's, 6 p.m., but I am still drinking coffee. So that's okay. All positive. I'm seeing smiley, excited. Great. Okay. So we have, I think, 3 or 4 more questions just to see what's in relation to your, you can keep adding, this will be open, the map. I love the map. And we can take a screenshot of that. Okay, so this is related to your mapper level. So I'm sure we have a mix of participants who are at different levels, and you can either, maybe you're familiar with the kind of categories on the tasking manager, or maybe you can make your own judgment on, whether you've, your level of experience is. Beginner, intermediate, advanced, wonderful, never map. So all of you have map, which is amazing. That's what we've expected. Wonderful and really interesting to see you here in a bit of the findings, also some kind of implications for different level of mappers. So it's useful for us to see. Wonderful. Thank you so much for engaging. And next one is, what are your roles on the hot tasking manager? So just getting move this, mapper validator. This is me creating it on the other. I should have, maybe in the chat you can specify if you'd like. Wonderful, really good to see a mix. And I'm sure you probably play different roles. So thank you for adding that information. Wonderful. I like how from the start it goes down. Okay. So this is an open question, one more, and then we move into the exciting part of the session. As this discussion, we will talk about RapiD. We wanted to see, first thing that comes to mind when you hear AI and open mapping. We've done this question before in some other webinars that we've run, but maybe first thing that comes to mind when you hear that question. Innovative, quality control, opportunity, segmentation, wonderful. Learning, caution, that's good. Fast, exciting, great. Learning, hype. It's shifting. Wow, machine generated. Difficult for beginners. Interesting. A lot of those I think we can pick up on. And the last question, thank you so much for adding. Can definitely keep that open. Is related to what you all hear today more about, is whether you've actually used RapiD before. For us is interesting too. I would anticipate a lot of yeses. Great, wonderful, really good to have actually some of you who've never used it. Oh, very exciting. And all of you know what RapiD is. That's why I guess you're in this session. So thank you so much. Wonderful. Thank you so much for engaging and adding your answers. That's really helpful. And I think it's really good already to see that we have a mix of participants. So that'll be quite interesting for the discussion. So I'll stop sharing now. And Letitia, I'll hand over to you to go into the upcoming slides. Okay, so a very 1 or 2 minutes for me more to just hear about the different working group and spaces, a bit like planning this session. So I think some of you in this group have joined the Tech and Innovation Working Group, which happens on a monthly basis. If you haven't joined or you're interested, you can scan the code and register. it's, it's an inclusive space for connecting, contributing, collaborating with others. We focus on very different topics. I think recently there was a lot of interest specifically on AI. We'll be planning more sessions, but yeah, a range of topics. So if you're interested, join us. And then the next slide is about a subgroup of the Tech and Innovation Working Group, which is the Tasking Manager Meetup. Just moving over to the next slide. Which I recognize a few names already of people joining us often. So that's, again, happens once a month, and we really focus just talking about the tasking manager, of any improvements, updates, and if you're interested, join us. Those are all the scanning codes. So going over to the next slide, and very, very excited to, as you can see on camera, is the researchers that you'll hear from today. And I've known them maybe now probably nearly 1 or 2 years, for quite some time, due to previous research that they've done. But I just wanted to introduce them and then hand over to them. So we have Yune Yu from Indiana University, Bloomington. We'll have Fei Gao from as well from the same university, and Vinit Tipnis, and I think we'll hear quite a bit from Vinit in the presentation. And we also have Gloria Orea from the University of Colorado Boulder. So they've all collaborated and inputted into that research topic, and I just wanted to also thank them for choosing, RapiD and the hot tasking manager for their research, and that's really useful. And I know they're very excited to hear as well from all of you. So yeah, handing over to the team for the presentation. And yeah, next slide. Thank you, Letitia.
Thank you, Petya, for the introduction. And thank you everyone for attending the webinar today. This project has been a result of a rich collaboration with HOT, and we are very excited to share our findings. But the main purpose today is to hear from you and everyone who has experienced RapiD, and even if they have not, we want to hear your feedback and your thoughts about our results and what you think about RapiD. Let's begin. So next slide, please. Earlier this year, Turkey and Syria had a massive earthquake on February 6, 2023. And for the hot response for multiple projects, RapiD was widely implemented. On the left-hand side, we have one of the example projects which implemented RapiD. And in the project description, it says that RapiD will predict the buildings and map the roads, which the mappers can choose to use. On the right side is a screenshot of what it would look like if a mapper used the RapiD editor. The pink highlighted areas are the buildings suggested by the AI. The mapper can choose to use this feature or ignore it and map it on their own. Next slide. 13 projects enabled RapiD. And as of April 2023, in these 13 projects, almost 21,200 total tasks had been completed, mapping and validation both. Almost 85% of these tasks were completed using RapiD. Since there was a large push for using RapiD, 2,773 volunteers used RapiD for the first time. Due to this large number of people using RapiD for the first time and being introduced to AI-assisted mapping for the first time, this gives us a unique setting to study all the people who have been experiencing RapiD for the first time, which brings us to the focus of our study. Next slide. Our research question, or the focus of our study, is how does exposure to RapiD affect volunteer productivity? And we define exposure as using RapiD for the first time. It is important to know that we're not studying whether continuous usage of RapiD affects productivity. We're just focusing on the first time and how that has an impact on productivity moving forward. We are more concerned with the behavioral implications of volunteers getting introduced to or exposed to AI-assisted mapping. And we define volunteer productivity as total tasks completed on a weekly level. And we combine the mapping task and validation task into one measure. Next slide. Since we are studying the effect of exposure to RapiD and how that affects productivity after the exposure, we need some data before the exposure. And in order to select that, we look for a starting point. Next slide. We choose December 26, 2022 as a starting point. This gives us 6 weeks of data for all the mappers on HOT. And based on this data, we then create our sample. In order to show how our data is set up, let's go through an example. Next slide. So let's say we have these two volunteers, 1 and 2. Both of them have been on the platform for 3 years. In the 6 weeks prior to the earthquake, volunteer 1 contributed 26 tasks across 4 projects, and volunteer 2 contributed 25 tasks across 5 projects. Both of them have been very similar in their tenure and their contributions to the platform in these prior weeks, leading up until February 6th. Next slide. On February 6th, volunteer 2 contributes to a Turkey project and uses RapiD, and volunteer 1 contributes to a Turkey project and does not use RapiD. And volunteer 1 continues to not using RapiD going forward. So in our data, volunteer 2 then becomes an exposed volunteer, and volunteer 1 is the comparison volunteer since they are so similar. Next slide. We match these two into one pair, and then volunteer 2 is the exposed volunteer, and we compare their productivity going forward. Since the only difference is volunteer 2 being exposed to RapiD, we argue that any difference on productivity or the behavioral implications of volunteer 2's productivity can be attributed to RapiD, since everything else in this pair is similar. We track their contributions on the platform until April 8, 2023, and we use all the data, not just Turkey projects, but for all the other contributions they make on the platform. This matching process is example for like one pair. Next slide. We do this matching process for all the exposed volunteers to find an appropriate comparison volunteers. And after doing that, we find 825 comparison volunteers who are very similar to 825 exposed volunteers. This then becomes our data set. And these two groups of volunteers have contributed 18,616 tasks across 226 projects between December 26 and April 8, 2023. We present our findings based on this data set. Next slide. Before the exposure, if we see both the groups, the comparison group being the gray line and the exposed volunteers being the red line, have similar contributions. There are slight differences, but they are not statistically noticeable. After the exposure, however, exposed volunteers see a reduction in their average weekly productivity. This effect is 8.8% across the weeks, but it ranges from 5% to 12% depending on which weeks we look at. Now, this was interesting to us, and we would like to hear about you later in the discussion if you have any thoughts on why this may persist. We were intrigued by this negative effect, and we were interested to see if this negative effect persists for all the volunteers on the platform, so that we can have a nuanced understanding whether there is some positive effect existing for some group of volunteers. So for that, we looked at the different experience levels of mappers on HOT. And next slide, please. Based off on that, we see that the beginners and intermediate mappers see a reduction in productivity of 10.1 and 10.4% respectively, whereas advanced mappers, after being exposed to RapiD, see an increase in productivity of 11.5%. So there is some positive effect for this subset of volunteers, that is the advanced mappers. And we see that it is not always a negative effect. We also look at whether having a validator status or not affects the productivity of the volunteers. Next slide, please. Mappers without a validator status see a reduction in productivity by 10.1%. Mappers with a validator status still have a negative effect, but it is reduced to a 6.4%. This is potentially because validators have multiple roles on the platform, and they are contributing mapping tasks and validation tasks to the platform. Next slide. So the key takeaways from our presentation is that after exposure to RapiD, beginner and intermediate volunteers see a decrease in their productivity. Advanced volunteers see an increase in their weekly productivity, and having a validator status mitigates the decrease in the productivity. Next slide. So the next steps for us for this project is to gather feedback from the HOT community And we have this survey, we have created this survey to get your responses on what you think of AI-assisted mapping and RapiD in general. And we also have this webinar and discussion in a few minutes. We want to hear from you to get your thoughts on our results and get an understanding of why this negative effect persists and a positive effect in certain cases. And once we have a better idea of a reason why, we will propose managerial implications to HOT to reduce the negative effect that exists of AI on volunteering. And lastly, we plan on documenting our results in a paper to circulate our results more broadly. Next steps. Next slide. So this is the end of the presentation, and now we would like to open it to the audience and hear your thoughts on what these results mean to you. What do you think about the results that is like negative effect? And these are just a few questions which can start the discussion, but feel free to give us your thoughts on RapiD, on AI-assisted mapping in general. And now I can hand it over to Petya.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Vinit. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing the findings. So if people have any questions, I would encourage you to raise your hand, and then we'll go through, all your questions. Or if you feel more comfortable like typing in the chat, please feel free to do so. So Sam, over to you to kick us off with your question.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for joining this call to share your research. It's absolutely fascinating and very possibly very impactful research. I'm interested to hear your thoughts about a suspicion I have. So I guess you could argue that buildings in Turkey are relatively easy to identify through machine learning. Buildings in Turkey probably have relatively crisp edges, generally have right angle corners. There might be predictable architectural patterns. We often do humanitarian mapping in areas of the world, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, where building kind of architectures are arguably much more difficult to identify through machine learning. For example, they might have thatched roofs, so they have very fuzzy edges. They might not have right angle corners. They might have they might be curved because they're circular buildings, and they might be much smaller than the buildings which are identified in Turkey. So I wonder if you think that this productivity drag of 9% would actually be much more severe in other areas of the world, particularly areas like sub-Saharan Africa, where building architectures are so much harder, or considerably so much harder for detection through machine learning.
So I think we just didn't look at Turkey. Turkey contributions ended at the week 5 and the week 6 mark. And we also look at the other projects that the volunteers, the mappers contributed to. And it is a good point that we have heard in the previous discussion as well that RapiD has been trained on certain malls and it has difficulties in Africa and places which the data is not trained on. So there is a potential that in those countries, there might be more of an issue, and there might be an effect if the RapiD experience, let's say, is not ideal. Right now, our focus was, as I mentioned, the first time using RapiD. And if let's say you said that the Turkey buildings are better, easier to identify using an AI model, and if that leads to already an 8-9% average effect, negative effect, it might be possible that, let's say, somebody who's experiencing RapiD for the first time in another country where the AI model is not trained well enough, it might have a positive effect or negative effect depending on how the mapper perceives AI's contribution to the platform.
Thank you, Vinit. And I think it's interesting, like whether that factors kind of accounted. I'm just reading through some of the comments and then I'll move over to the other raised hands. But interesting, I think, Martin, what he's saying that, some is more easily, but also contains areas that had high-rise buildings that are a big challenge for AI, specifically in that context.
I just want to quickly let me just quickly jump in. So I think this is a really interesting point, Sam, that you're bringing up. And I will say that we haven't really looked at variation in quality, let's say, of mapping. So remember that all of our projects, or rather like the exposure to RapiD that we investigated for this study was all from the same geographical area, basically, right? Because they were all Turkey projects. So in a way, like, everyone was kind of coming from the same starting point. But I do think it's a totally valid question and something that might be worth investigating from our end. For example, like if users are kind of, let's say, getting exposed to RapiD for the first time in areas maybe that are harder to map, maybe that impacts their perception of RapiD more or less, right? And so it's a really great point. I can't say confidently yes or no what would happen to that effect, let's say in sub-Saharan Africa, but it's a great point and something that we'll definitely consider kind of expanding our study to.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, both. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to ask, I think as I was, so Sam also is part of, the HOT team, work in partnership, and he trains a lot of organizations, so very involved in the tasking manager. But if I ask you maybe first Ralph and then Martin, just to say, your name and maybe your role or kind of, engagement with the tasking manager, just for context for the group, that would be helpful. So over to you, Ralph, and then Martin, and then I'll try and look into the chats as well. Over to you, Ralph.
Right. Yes. Hello, folks. My name's Ralph Ayton. I'm a full-time employee with HOT. I am responsible for the validation community in a way, but I am also the manager trainer for the HOT Global Validators. So my interest as co-chair of the quality control working group is the quality of the map. Now, you definitely chose a very poor example, well, a good example for your research in the sense that it had a variation of country and cities and towns, an excellent mix. The AI that you're talking about was not AI, first of all. It was purely machine-generated raw data. It had not been corrected or amended or checked. It was put on RapiD and allowed for beginners to actually play around with it. The validators spent a lot of time and actually had to create separate projects just to go over and fix up and correct a lot of the stuff that the beginners just downloaded straight off RapiD. Now, this is a problem with us. When we do a mass download, we make the people who want to do that jump through hoops. They've got to, first of all, they've got to check their data and make sure it is correct and valid, that it conforms to all the standards of OpenStreetMap. If we are going to start doing this RapiD stuff without those parameters, then it is going to slow any project down because as the validators and the experience mappers say, it takes more time to fix up the buildings from the footprints than it does to just draw them straight off. And this is a point. So what you're seeing in the time elements of the more experienced mappers is they're actually fixing and adjusting buildings. Now, for the beginner mappers, a lot of them are not fixing and adjusting buildings. What they are doing is just downloading straight onto OpenStreetMap, and someone else ends up having to fix the buildings. So there are a number of parameters here. Some projects that were available for the earthquake were in actual fact projects that were doing nothing else but had a team of hand-picked experienced mappers fixing up the Microsoft footprint mapping. You've heard about the problems in the city towns where you have high-rise buildings, where the buildings actually had both the roof and the wall drawn as one building, and then obliterated any other buildings behind it, so no adjustments took place. So yes, you'll see that in the chat. A number of the validators have actually said that those were the problems. Now, this is not all doom and gloom. Quite a few of the buildings out in the country areas, the rural areas, were reasonably good because those buildings don't change, alter, and most of them are not high-rise. So I think with the imagery that was used, it was sharp enough for the AI to make a good comparison against the background countryside. So the rural areas were reasonably good. I will give it that. I don't know how any of this affects your statistics or the way you actually identified what was happening, but that's the take from me. I'll end up here now. There's a lot more that could be said, but I'll leave it for that. I mean, there's even the difference in what imagery was used to create the footprints against the imagery that we were using for the disaster. So there's another problem involved in RapiD. So I'll leave that over to you and back to Petja.
Thank you, Ralph. I don't know if anyone needs to wants to respond, but I think that's why we're here to hear the experiences and all kind of differences. I can see Russ in the chat as well mentioning the differentiation between RapiD and the data sets, and what you mentioned also about different areas as well. So I think it's, at least I found it useful to hear your experience. Anything else from the team, or we can move over to Martin? Or good.
I would like to comment on something. So I think I understand what Ralph and many of the comments in the chat are pointing to the fact that of the quality of the data. So we have also considered that, and that might be one of the why this is going on. However, we were wondering if that would really kind of explain the sustained negative effect that we see with volunteers, because we understand that at least, if you go for the first time and you see that the RapiD is not kind of suggesting the right shapes, they may say that I don't like this tool, and they may kind of not use it, or kind of maybe slow them down because they need to correct many things. Maybe they don't continue using that in the future, right? So, but we don't, again, just to clarify, we don't capture whether they are continuously using it or not, but we just see after you are first exposed to RapiD, what happens with your productivity as a mapper in the following weeks, right? So if this was let's say bad quality suggested by the tool, we would guess yes, they may kind of slow down for that week maybe, but maybe for the future, maybe they don't decide to use it anymore. So why would their productivity would continue to be low, right? That's kind of one of intriguing part for us. What would kind of explain this sustained negative effect? Is something against a specific RapiD, or is something that affected them personally? That's all kind of other questions that we are throwing there for your insights.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you. Okay, over to you, Martin. And then, it's really interesting, the discussion in the chat.
Yeah, thanks, Petja. I'm Martin. I'm a validator, and what I have with the Turkey project is that I was one of a team of third-tier validators. So I validated after the project was finished by the first tier validators, and then I went over the whole project to see what was wrong. So I have a bit an idea of what the project contains. I don't think Sam said it was an ideal situation for AI, because Turkey had a good imagery, and I think the buildings in Turkey, they were quite complicated. There were many high-rise buildings, there were many complex buildings. So the result was, at least what I saw, what the AI made of it was some weird shaped not good buildings, not good shaped buildings. And it was hard to make sense of it. And I think what I saw from examples, pictures from Bing and the Bing building dataset, all the examples are areas with small buildings that all are quite square and all nicely apart from each other. And then the AI can do its job. But as soon as a building is complex or high rise, then it goes wrong. And I think that is one of the reasons people are thinking, well, it's a strange form that I see, this prediction from the AI. What should I do with it? And that slows them down. And well, maybe they accept it, and then the task is invalidated. Well, conclusion, I don't think Turkey was the best area to use the AI because of the complex building structure. And there was a lot of, there were many urban areas, and I doubt if you compare if you count the rural buildings and you count the urban buildings, I doubt if the rural buildings are the majority. I think the urban buildings, the complex, difficult buildings were the majority. And that's also where the AI often fails. And that could be a reason for the slowdown of the results of this survey. Okay, that was it. Thanks.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, really useful. I don't know, any responses or kind of reflections on this one? I see different agreements in the chat. And I think what Russ is saying, because this is actually a question as well I had on whether like people stopped using RapiD at some point, what were the implications for some of those projects? So I'm just going through the chat and I wanted to see, I saw Samson first, you had a question. I don't know if you wanted to read that out on whether the research take into account other factors like density of features, urgency of the data, and quality. I think Yuna briefly picked up on, not accounting for quality, but is there anything, Samson, you would like to add, or we can focus on that? Just having a look.
I guess I can try to answer this question. You can correct me if I'm wrong. So basically, we're looking at the volunteer level, right? Like basically examining for each volunteer what happens to his or her productivity once they use RapiD or don't use RapiD, right? As Vinit kind of showed, we're trying to match people that looked very similar before the earthquake and then compare their performance afterwards to try to attribute any differences that we might see afterwards to the fact that one person used RapiD and one person did not use RapiD. So we're not really looking at like project level data, I would say. We're more looking at individual characteristics that might influence, let's say, their productivity in a given week, right? So we are accounting for things like, okay, like what is their experience, or like how many tasks have they contributed to this platform, to HOT before this week? We're also accounting for like, okay, like not just how many tasks, but like, how long have they been around, right? So I don't think that we took into account things like the density of features. So we didn't really look at, let's say, like a specific task, like what were the features in there? Because again, this is more like at an aggregate weekly level, we wanted to examine like what happened to their productivity. Vinit, do you have anything to add there?
No, I think I agree. We didn't account for the density and the urgency of the data as well. Like we were just focusing on how many tasks the valid mappers are doing every week. And after being exposed to RapiD versus not being exposed, and we just compared that.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully that answers your question, Samson. on this one. If other people want to, if you raise your hand, and it will be really interesting to hear from maybe some of you who are not so experienced, or you've just heard about RapiD and you heard about those findings. So if don't be shy if you want to share any reflections or what you thought when you first heard of RapiD as well. I'll just go to the next question in the chat, which I think was from Emmy. Again, Emmy, if there's anything you would like to add, feel free. I'm just reading through. So, do we know if mappers exposed to RapiD continued using AI-assisted mapping after that? And then kind of the reflection of being possible that AI-assisted mapping is actually a slower process, as sometimes could be easier to just draw buildings instead of looking what things went wrong with AI and fix them.
So yes, I don't remember the exact number, but at least 90% of the people only use RapiD in the first week. They don't reuse RapiD starting second week onwards. There are a small subset of people who use it in the second week, but no one uses it beyond the second week. That is more so why we are intrigued about the negative effect persists beyond the second week as well. So that is why we are wondering what could lead to that drop. Because even if the quality is slow, if RapiD is slower, we can understand when they are actively using RapiD, the first week and the second week, there is a drop in productivity. But we are still to understand why that drop persists starting week 3 onwards.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think maybe a bit of your thinking as well, Emmy, on this one. Okay, let me see what else we had in the chat. I think some other reflections as well. We make sure we capture those. And I'm just looking at this. You had a question, which was how much time the validator had to spend validating tasks map using RapiD versus task map using other editors. Yeah, I think that's probably not captured in that research. So you're interested in, maybe that's more from the kind of validator side of the time spent on validating tasks using RapiD versus other editors.
Yeah, we haven't looked into that. We haven't looked into that yet, but we did discuss it. We were thinking about, like, from a validator's perspective, using RapiD was the other, if it takes more time or less. We couldn't potentially look at going forward, like the next step, it could be one of those.
Yeah, as you said, probably another research another research topic, but yeah, interesting question. Any other? Okay, let me see the other questions. And yeah, if you would like to speak and raise your hand, feel free to do so. I'm just looking through next one. So hopeful, what's the difference between RapiD and ID editor? So I feel like there'll be other people in the group who probably better explain that than me. But yeah, ID editor has been going for a long time. It's a simple, like, manual way of editing the buildings, where RapiD uses Microsoft Footprint. So you have predictions, and what you saw in the first slide, you can use those mainly from buildings and roads, if I'm not mistaken. If others from our Vapor Validator community would like to explain more, happy to as well, hopeful. So reading through a lot of reflections, which is good to see in the chat. Small tasks, and let me see, I think Geoffrey posted a question from YouTube. What does an exposed volunteer exactly mean? Maybe we'll repeat that again. I think that's a good question. Yeah. And I saw your response.
Yeah. So an exposed volunteer is the one who has used RapiD for the first time during the Turkey earthquake. And they have to at least been using it for the chain sets that they use. It cannot be they just know about RapiD or they read about RapiD. They have to actually go and use RapiD to do a particular chain set or finish a task using RapiD.
Hope that answers your question. I think, yeah. And if you have others, you can reach out to us. Okay.
Tia, can I jump in really quick?
Of course.
So thank everybody for such a great discussion. I think the quality point is a good one. I also see like there's some interest maybe in looking at more at a task level or a project level, right? Like what is the impact of, let's say, turning on RapiD or enabling it based on some of the comments that we're seeing. So as I mentioned, like our research is more at the volunteer level, the individual volunteer level, but it would be interesting, let's say, to like a really interesting case would be like you have a task in this one geographical area and the task right like next to it, one has RapiD enabled and one doesn't, right? So in a sense, they're right next to each other. And what do we see any difference in productivity and quality, in how easy it was to validate? That would be kind of an interesting analysis to tell us something like, okay, this is the effect of RapiD, let's say, on how quickly or how easily or how hard it was to map this particular area, right? And in that sense, we would be able to investigate more specific things that I saw coming up in the chat, like, what was the split of the task like, or how many features, the density of the features, that kind of thing. So again, our research, I guess, is limited in that sense. We don't consider those factors since we're considering more at an aggregate level, but that would be an interesting direction to push forward in. But I did want to kind of steer the conversation towards, like, again, we're trying to really understand why volunteers are kind of deterred after they use RapiD. So I saw Russ's comment like, oh, I have a RapiD project and it does speed me up quite significantly, right? And we've heard the same also from mappers, like some say this and some don't. And I do think that, in our research, we do find, for example, that advanced mappers, they do see gains in productivity, right? So I guess that Russ might fit that definition more, but we see especially this negative effect for beginner volunteers most strongly, and also for intermediate volunteers. So we're trying to really understand and maybe get your feedback, since some of your validators as well as mappers, so you may have heard from the community, like why people kind of step back after they've used RapiD before. And again, if it was just a quality thing, it would be hard for us to really argue like why it continues. I can offer some insight into our own personal theories of what we have going on. Like, I know there's been discussions about, will AI assisted mapping, like, does that affect people's motivations, right? Do they feel like maybe this task is less meaningful because they see that, maybe the AI can do it for me instead, right? Like, those are like some initial thoughts that we've had, but we just kind of wanted to also ask you all if you have any more insights.
Yeah. Thank you. So maybe I would first hand over to maybe Rami and then for you, Ralph, just to hear different voices. And yeah, would love to hear your perceptions, exactly what Une just talked about. So maybe Rami first and then Ralph.
Thanks, Peter. I just wanted to amplify Samson's point about task splitting. So we have this feature in Tasking Manager where we let volunteers split a larger task into smaller ones. And if you're just taking the task count, right, like there are cases like when mappers don't split the task. So maybe like I have mapped a larger task area, but still I'm just accounted for one task. But another mapper who took up like a smaller area, they ended up splitting the task into further like 4 different tasks. And so they have like 4 tasks count. Just wanted to amplify the point that Samson made. Yeah. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Ramya. Yeah. Over to you, Ralph. And for others, just think about personal reflections or experiences. That would be really good to hear from all of you. Over to you, Ralph.
Thank you, Petya. Yes, Ramya's point was one that I was going to mention, that this, of course, does skew the statistics slightly, because when they split a task, they get allocated 4 extra tasks on their account, which is does give a false reading of how many tasks they've completed. But the other thing I wanted to say is your questions about beginners not continuing. You must understand that a lot of the beginners do not come from a mapping background. So when they start off, they have a very, very steep learning curve. So when they come across buildings coming off the footprint that they are expecting to be far better than anything they would produce, and it doesn't match the background imagery, or looks wrong, or looks weird shaped, this confuses them. They now don't know quite what to do with this. And I think their lack of experience and knowledge in background imagery, in moving objects, in changing the shape of objects is a challenge for them. I am only assuming from some of the experiences that I've had, but I think this would be something that would be for further investigation. As to the actual causes, there may be some that I don't know about, but those are the challenges beginners face. And I think in some of the cases, we stop the beginners from mapping the more complex areas using RapiD because of this. Thank you, Petya.
Thank you, Ralph. Do we have, it's interesting in the Menti, we had a few people who said beginners, and maybe you were in the mix of using RapiD. And if you'd, would love to hear, but maybe your experience or what you thought. Feel free to raise your hand, or any other reflections. I'll just the why beginners back off. Great. Thank you, Catherine, if I'm pronouncing your name. Thank you for sharing your view as a beginner. Wonderful. Why beginners? Any others, or Emmy, over to you. Thank you for sharing in the chat.
Yes, I was thinking into the experience of mapping. My question was that one thing is to make an effort of mapping an area and helping other people through mapping, feeling the satisfaction of the work done. It's really great when you draw buildings and other things and you map, and then you look at the map and you see all the things that you mapped of you and other people around you and the work that you did. And maybe the experience of using RapiD is like very different. It's like you click a button, everything is automatically mapped there, and you need to do another kind of job. You need to see what's wrong. You don't need to draw and see every building, every place that maybe you already know, because if this is a town that you know or an area that you know, while you are mapping, you are also looking into the background image all the time. You are like in somewhere you are there, in that place, you are learning about that place. And I think that a very different experience is to use RapiD for mapping. It's like more like, as I say there, like helping AI to map, because the AI can do it by itself for now. I'm not sure when we will be able to map everything, but at least we are talking about buildings right now, and maybe roads. So I am thinking about that, about the experience of mapping, because we are like trying to build a community, to tell a lot of people, hey, come here, help other people to mapping, do open mapping, and the experience of using RapiD, I think, is very different.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I don't know if any responses, but really interesting reflections as well. You know, the role of, if you're using RapiD, are you already playing a validator role in a way? So yeah, different reflections and experiences. Anyone else who?
I just want to piggyback off of this. Emmy, thanks for your point. I think Emmy, Ralph, you guys brought up some really good maybe intuition about what might be going on, and Martin's point about, RapiD makes who should be mappers suddenly do a different role, right? I think that's a very interesting point, and one that maybe we didn't, we've kind of thought about, but not really concretely. So I just wanted to say, thanks for bringing that up. I think those are really good intuitions as to, basically, we're saying, maybe a mapper comes in expecting to do some mapping, and all of a sudden they're acting more like a validator, right? So that might affect their kind of perspectives on, what they're contributing. So thank you.
Thank you for your reflections. I think that's why we're here, and thank you, for, some beginners as well to, it's not easy to say, if something was difficult, to kind of step away from it. So thank Thank you for those reflections. I think we're near the hour, so obviously we can stay for a bit longer, but I just wanted to kind of wrap up and let you know of channels to kind of think of next steps, how to keep in touch. And for anyone who has extra time and still wants to speak to the team, I just wanted to thank you for your input, and thank you to the whole team, to Ine, Vinod, Gloria, and Faye for taking the time, for sharing the findings. And just to say, this is kind of not the end, as Vinod mentioned, kind of next steps to hearing from you. Here is you can scan the survey that you can see in the slide. I'll paste it in the chat. It's an anonymous survey, so if you maybe don't feel comfortable sharing your views in this channel, feel free to do that through that survey as well. And then you can see the emails of the team as well. So if you have any very specific questions, I'm sure they'll be happy to answer. But I would really encourage us to continue the discussion. So if you go into the next slide, just to say, we have the usual channels with the Tasking Manager meetups that happen. So we can definitely, in upcoming meetups, take the space if people are interested to continue that discussion. Or on Slack already. We have the blogs on RSM discourse as well that you can read. So I'll be really happy to kind of start a discussion to that. But huge thank you. I don't know if there's anything else others want to share, but really appreciate the time that you've taken. And we'd love to have your feedback. Thank you, everyone. So I think, that's the end of kind of formal session and recording that, but we're happy to stay for a bit longer for any